Well, good morning, everyone. This is Jessica from Baker and Bloom. We understand everyone is facing different kind of challenges during this fifth wave of COVID. And we've been trying to provide and still providing a series of very popular parent workshops to take your mind off COVID and also kind of generate some more food for thought. The past few parent talks have been very well received. We recommend you to check out our YouTube website that will be shared in the chat group. To watch more of our past presentations, especially if you're stuck at home during these times. We will continue to also offer informative and relevant parent workshops in the coming weeks, so stay tuned. Subscribe to our newsletter and YouTube channel for more information. So I want to kind of enter into today's parent talk topic, which is U.S. college admissions. We are very happy for our admission students last year, as almost all of them got into their first choice in early decision and early action. I think Jennifer or Phil, maybe you can go to the next slide. Yep. So as I said, we are very happy for our admission students last year, as almost all of them got into their first choice in early action and early decision. You can see that these are some of the results, and the results are still coming in of the early decision and early action alone. So we got a lot of students into Ivy Leagues, and all of them are their top choices. So we thought we would invite one of our college counselors to give a talk on the latest trends in US college admissions today. And so let me introduce our speaker. So I really think it is an understatement to say Jennifer Lee has extensive experience in both education and counseling. She has worked in multiple international schools, not only in Hong Kong, but also Shanghai, Korea, and the United States. She's worked in the field of college admissions and college counseling for almost 2 decades. So both on secondary schools and post-secondary schools. She was, before coming back to Hong Kong, she was actually formerly the head of counseling at Shanghai American School. I think a very fun fact that I wanted to share about her, she has visited over 250 universities in the United States and other international cities as well. So I thought that would be a fun fact to share. So these are just only some of her experiences in the education and counseling alone, but she not only worked on the outside, meaning like high schools or maybe in a private capacity, but she actually also worked in the inside and still continues to work for universities in relation to college admission. So she knows what happens in I don't know if you guys watch some of the movies about college counseling, but they usually have a round table. She knows what happens in those round tables. So Jennifer was former admission officer of Scripps College of Claremont College Consortium. And she actually has served as an outside, and I don't know, Jennifer, I think you still are serving, right? As the admissions reader for UCLA for the past 11 years and still counting. So she really knows what happens in terms of the selection process. So besides having these experiences, Jennifer is also highly involved and leads a lot of the international admission communities. She has served on multiple international recognized committees. And I'll just name a few because the list is just way too long. She has served on the International Association for College Admission Counseling Professional Development Committee and Financial Committee. Given the time, I'm not going to name the other few. Presented at various international and US conferences. Let's suffice many, many, many. So I think another interesting fun fact to really highlight in this aspect of her career is that she was actually the inaugural recipient of the Rising Star Award of the International Association for College Admission Counseling. So she definitely is a star player. So I think besides highlighting Jennifer's involvement in education and counseling, I really wanted to also highlight her career before her counseling, because you can see the breadth of what she has done, what she is exposed to. And with all these experience, you know how she can help your student and to not only navigate what major to take, but also navigate what careers to maybe explore. So prior to working in education, Jennifer actually worked for Goldman Sachs on Wall Street. She actually graduated from Wellesley College and then afterwards went to Harvard University Graduate School of Education. So as a liberal arts major herself and also mastering in education, Jennifer is able to navigate different types of careers. And I think with her experience, she can help students navigate different majors and career choices. With a lot of our students nowadays having a lot of pressure and also a lot of questions regarding this. She is so I want to summarize with Jennifer is a very passionate college counselor. And her resume sounds very impressive, but she is very holistic and she is student-centric. So I think with that, I will let Jennifer start her presentation.
Wow, thanks so much, Jessica. And thanks everyone for joining us on a Saturday morning. I hope that you're staying safe and healthy and calm despite the challenges with COVID here in Hong Kong. I just want to emphasize, I think we have to keep very clear as it really is a mental marathon. And I think my intention for providing this presentation today, it's for applicants to be informed about the process and to be very thoughtful and intentional how to approach this process and how to best prepare to be a successful applicant, because we know that this process can be frenetic and anxiety ridden. But I want to emphasize that with hard work, the key here is if you're intentional and introspective and mindful about this approach, I think, and also with the collaboration with parents, I think that this can be a process that doesn't have to be so anxiety ridden. So today, I want to talk about the impact of COVID-19 on U.S. higher education admissions. It's been 3 years of the pandemic's onset, and before the pandemic, the college admissions process was already a very complicated and kind of constantly changing landscape. But with the onset of the pandemic, I think it's accelerated this complexity. And we all know that COVID-19 has disrupted our lives and routines, and the global pandemic has impacted almost every industry here, and higher education is no exception. With the disruptions, I think colleges had to figure out hybrid models of teaching. College students had to adjust to hybrid classes, wearing masks around campus. Admission officers are also continuing to adapt. But the good news is that traditional four-year universities in the US, they're not going anywhere. And going to college, going to university is still a great investment for your future. But I do think on top of all of the changes and the disruptions, I think that you really need to start planning for university. And I think the students, you got to continue focusing on doing well in school and all of that. And I know that families are doing the best that you can given kind of the disruptive nature of this year, from in-person school to online school to back to in-person and then online. So I think with parents, give yourself some grace during this time as well. And remember, the ultimate goal isn't just to ensure our students are excelling academically, but also growing into good humans. And I think with empathy and an understanding of the patience we need with one another in this moment in history, but with patience and planning and adaptability, I think we'll all come out of this experience hopefully with a better perspective. And with that said, I want to talk about these trends, and I'm going to go kind of in depth into it. We're seeing some new trends in U.S. college admissions. I'm going to highlight the ones that I think are quite important, and there are more coming up. So we're going to do the best that we can in terms of sharing that information here. So what are these trends that we're seeing? Test optional. Test optional. Many universities right now are going test optional because of cancellation of ACT and SAT test scores. I think we're also seeing that some universities have decided to get rid of testing altogether, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. we're also seeing this concept and notion of demonstrated interest. Colleges are paying more emphasis on this. Admit rates will continue to remain low, especially in the highly selective admissions arena and for highly selective institutions. The reason being, again, it's all kind of tied in because of test optional. Students are not submitting scores, so they're like increasing the number of applications on their list. So we're going to see a lot of this kind of trend in the college admissions landscape. Other trends that we're seeing: virtual visits. Colleges are using technology to do outreach. In fact, some personalized outreach from admission officers. And then we're continuing to see longer wait lists. And I'm going to go into this again at greater length so you understand what these trends actually are. So this is the study by Open Doors, and basically if you look at this graph, I just wanted to show this visual. In 2020, 2021, at the onset of the pandemic, there was a precipitous drop and decline of international students going into the US. And as we all know, it was a result of visa issues, obviously safety issues and all that. So you see this drop happening. And then even in the undergraduate level, you see that international students were making up 39% of the population in the US. Again, you were seeing the drop from 2019 to 2020. The good news is now that we're in 2021 and going into 2022, I mean, we're here in 2022, many universities kind of bounce back and they still want to recruit international students, and they're finding really creative ways to connect with students via technology. Colleges reported a 68% surge in new international student enrollment following that steep decline in the previous year. And with that said, though, this is still a very competitive landscape, especially at the highly selective institutions. And I want to, and I'm emphasizing that because I think when you come to Baker and Bloom, you're not looking, you're probably looking at a certain subset of higher education options. So test optional and what that means. Essentially, this is kind of the definition. Basically, universities are letting students decide whether they want to submit their test scores or not. Over 1,800 universities in the US are going test optional, and the number is growing. There's a resource out there called, if you look it up, fairtest.org. They have created a whole movement for universities to not require the standardized testing in the college admissions process. Some colleges are also text flexible, so they are allowing students to submit scores and test scores in place, such as like the SAT subject test, the IB score, or even the AP test. Other colleges are using what's called test blind, and they won't even consider your test scores even if you submit them. So I think the key here is that you really have to know that the policies differ from college to college. All right, so you have to go to the college's main website and see what they're saying exactly about test optional. And I think the whole movement for test optional, depending on the university, it was because of limited access for students with test cancellations and with COVID-19. The pandemic has brought on a number of colleges to really think about the standardized testing industry and what that means for their specific institution. But again, I think for each student, it really depends. And I think the question comes up, even if they're test optional, should I submit my ACT or SAT score or not? I think it really depends on the applicant. Some students are still submitting because obviously they're good test takers, and because it's test optional, you still have the option to submit it. So I would say if you are a strong test taker and you receive a high score on your SAT or ACT, I think it does kind of serve in your favor. This is my personal opinion, to submit the test score. But again, every school is doing something different, so you really have to read the fine print. Harvard, for instance, they decided that due to COVID-19 that they're going to see how things go for the next 4 years, and basically they have decided to make things test optional. And this is Bill Fitzsimmons. He's the Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid at Harvard. He's been at Harvard for a very, very long time. And this was a New York Times article. This just came out December 2021. And I'm just including Harvard's policy just to give you kind of what's a flavor of what's going on in the college admissions landscape. And reason being, once Harvard makes a decision in college admissions, a lot of times the institutions they trickle down and follow suit. So this is what that Bill Fitzsimmons has said, and so students won't be disadvantaged, but they will start looking at other factors and criteria. The UCs, which is the University of California system, the 9 UC campuses, the 9 undergraduate UC campuses, have gotten rid of the SAT and ACT altogether. So this is an interesting and very, policy-wise, a very bold move on behalf of the UC. So they're just getting rid of it altogether. But again, for international students, they're looking at your English proficiency. So like IELTS and TOEFL, they will still look at that. And just keep in mind with all of this, I mean, I know here in Asia, especially here in Hong Kong, testing is a big thing and students get super stressed out. Just keep in mind that it's one part of the application. But there's been so much news around it with test optional. I just want you to keep things in mind. All right, so what's another trend that we're seeing? Demonstrated interest. Some of you may not know what this is. Colleges use demonstrated interest to basically track students' interest in that particular school. So the reason being, colleges want to yield you. Yield meaning they want you to pick their school to attend. And they use this as kind of a yield tool, all right? So you have the opportunity to demonstrate that you're interested in that school in a variety of different ways. You can do it through your supplemental essays. You can do it by signing up for the emails to the school. You better open the emails and check the emails because colleges and universities track that. They have all these data analytics where they track if the students open the email or not. You should attend their webinars and virtual visits. This is another sign and indication that you can show colleges that you are demonstrating interest. I want to bring this study up. This is the National Association of College Admission Counseling. This is the governing body of U.S. higher education institutions, all right? So like all the deans of admission, all the college counselors around the world are part of this organization. And basically they do a survey each year. This is based on 2018, 2019. This is the latest that's come out. And as you can see, demonstrated interest was number 6, all right? So this is why I'm saying with the pandemic, because students can't necessarily visit campus physically, especially international students, this is one way that I think colleges are going to be really tracking the students' level of interest in that college. All right, so another trend that we're seeing is that there's an increase in applications, especially at the highly selective institutions, all right? Because again, I said some of these institutions are going test optional, hence more students are applying and the number of colleges on the students lists are growing. So I would say, you have to be very thoughtful of the college list, but as you can see overall, the highly selective institutions are getting loads and loads of application. You can see competition also increased from international students from regions like India, Pakistan, and Brazil. So this is especially pronounced at the elite colleges and universities. Jenny Rickard, she's the president and CEO of the Common App. The Common App is the application portal in which many of the universities are on and which students will use to apply to the U.S. higher education institutions. And she even pronounced that there were, obviously here her quote is that more selective institutions experience greater year-over-year increases. So you can see that, for instance, in Brown University, look at these numbers. It pretty much, the exorbitant number of increase in applications. All right, and this is just in 2021. So given the preponderance of all of this, you're also going to see another trend. I'm not going to go so in depth into this, but you're seeing more students also applying in the early round. All right, so the Yale accepted 14% in 2020, and then 2021, it's gone down to 7%. Here's some interesting data that I tracked. 11 colleges with the lowest acceptance rate in fall 2020. Obviously, fall 2021, we're going to get the numbers, later on this year. But look at this. I mean, the acceptance rate. And I share this not to scare anyone, but to, again, keep things in context that the highly selective institutions, because the applications are increasing, it's a natural effect that they're going to have very low acceptance rates. Right? These numbers are, I would think it's just getting very competitive out there. But with that said, I want to emphasize there are many other great higher education institutions in the U.S. If you expand your list, the key is to have a very well-balanced list with this. But again, I know here in Hong Kong, the parents and the students are looking at a very specific bandwidth of schools. But I think I have a very different philosophy about this, so we can talk about that later on. All right, so other trends we're seeing, the virtual visits and personalized outreach at your schools. I don't know which schools you're attending, but obviously if there are many international school kids here and also some local schools, I would say if your school offers these virtual visits from universities providing these webinars, please attend it. This is one way students can demonstrate the interest. And also there's other resources that you can do, because obviously right now with the fifth wave and also some countries banned, I doubt you're going to be going on a spring college tour in person to the US. So take advantage of the different virtual tours as well as the resources that are out there. There's a specific college counselor who provided this webinar search. Universities are basically putting a lot of webinars out there, providing information sessions for students, and you can find this on this website. And again, admission officers are doing some creative things. They're doing some personalized outreach. So if you get an email from an admission officer and that's a school that you're highly interested in, I would say please interact with them. Please respond to the emails. I know this generation isn't always the best about responding to emails because you guys are used to, text and short bursts of interaction. But in this process, some of the traditional routes are going to still count. Another thing that we're seeing is longer wait lists. Wait lists are growing. For instance, at Brown, you can see that they use the wait list very strategically, and it worked out in their favor to yield the students with a very high yield of 69%. This basically means that a lot of students were initially placed on the wait list, and then you can see that it's growing, and college admission officers and admission offices are using this as a strategy. At other schools, however, the wait list is nearly a formality before acceptance. So you can see the numbers doubled from 2019 to 2020. So I would say that's good news for college applicants. But again, because of the complexity of this, we'll see what they do this year. But I think college wait lists, for the most part, it's been extremely active during the pandemic, and if you are placed on the wait list, that is actually still a positive thing in this situation and in this climate and context. All right, I'm going to kind of switch gears now and talk a little bit about, let's transition and talk a little bit about what can we do, what are some tips, and what are some advice and thoughts about this whole process. Because again, I know it can be overwhelming, especially if your parents have not gone through this process in the US. Even if you have, it's still a very changing landscape. So I want to provide some thoughts and tips of how you can best prepare. I'm bringing this table back because these are the factors considered in U.S. college admissions. So when admission officers around the U.S., they make decisions on your application, they are still looking at all these factors, right? And when they did this study, it turns out grades are still highly, highly important. So I know you guys are, going from in-person school to online school, the EDV said back to online school. So you still really have to manage your grades as best as you can in this process. The strength of curriculum in your school is going to matter as well. So you have no control. If you obviously attend a school that offers the IB, you have to do the IB, AP, A levels, what have you. You have to take, if you want to stand out, I think your strength of curriculum and taking rigorous courses is going to be very important. The test piece we talked about, it's still a consideration for some schools. And then the essay is very important. So I'm going to shift gears and talk about what are some of the tips, what are some of your thoughts about this. First of all, policy changes. Because things are changing rapidly, I really want to emphasize to students, check the university's website. It's sometimes they have separate pages dedicated to what's going on for COVID-19. So it's really important that you stay on top of the news on the different policy changes. And the next big thing, and I'm going to go into in depth about this, is focus on writing a good personal statement and essay. This is a no-brainer. You have every control over this as an applicant. This is the one part in your application that you have, full control over. And so you have to prepare well. I want to talk a little bit about self-awareness, knowing yourself, knowing what your strengths are, having a clear vision and goal for this process. And this isn't something you can procrastinate on, okay? This isn't something you pull out in the 12th hour and you're like, okay, I'm done with my college applications. It just doesn't happen that way. Reason being, you're competing with students from all over the globe. All right, you've got students in Manhattan on the Upper East Side who have been preparing for this since, pre-kindergarten, since preschool. Okay, I'm being a little bit facetious here, but you get the idea. You have to develop good social emotional skills during this time, okay? Because as you see, a lot of colleges are shifting their policies. They're getting rid of tests. So what are they going to eventually replace that with? I believe in the future it's going to be factors that measure your presentation, your communication, your emotional intelligence. All right, so let's talk about the focus on personal essays and supplemental essays. I really, really believe that this is going to continue to play a significant role in the admissions process, especially during COVID, because, it's a no-brainer. Why? Because these are the only data points that are handcrafted by the applicant themselves in their own voice and words. Since the SAT essay portion has been discontinued, and I doubt many of you are going to take the ACT with the essay, it's difficult for admission officers to gauge your writing ability, including grammar, word selection, flow, and other metrics about how well you can organize your thoughts and words and effectively express them. So when admission officers see the same high GPA, the same test scores, the same recommendation letters coming out from Hong Kong 50 times a day, all right? When I say 50 times a day, you can be number 1 in the read, you could be number 25, you can be number 50. But if they're seeing the same thing day in, day out in your application file, the huge deciding factor, and I also speak from experience, is going to be your personal statement. All right, this is your writing audition. right? So you have to effectively capture the admission officer's attention so that they can advocate for you in committee. And so in my humble opinion, I think that this essay sometimes is the one thing that can connect all the dots on your application, all the different data points, your GPA, strength of rigor, all of that, and pull it together in your application file and explain why you are who you are and why you do what you do. So I hope that really emphasizes, that this personal statement is not like an academic paper. It's a narrative. It's a story that's going to be very different from what you're accustomed to writing in school. So you really have to plan for this, think about it, different themes. So I hope that was like very clear, and I can't emphasize this enough. And then also last year, because of the pandemic, Common App decided to add an optional COVID-19 essay, and this is what it is. Because of all the disruptions, this is my perspective, but I don't think it's too far off, is that basically Common App is hinting here that you should use the 250-word COVID-19 section so that you can use the rest of your application for other things. All right, if you follow my logic, keep in mind that if you do write about your pandemic in your personal statement, you can't necessarily use this 250-word COVID-specific section for anything else. On the other hand, if you write about the pandemic in the COVID-specific section, then you can use your personal statement for whatever else you want to write about. So again, you have to be thoughtful, you have to be mindful about this approach and strategic and how you want to use the space. And I always say words matter, semantics matter, so how you write, what you write, it's going to be very important. All right, I want to switch gears. I don't know if you've been watching the Winter Olympics, but basically yesterday, if you don't know who this is, Eileen Gu, she's been representing China. All geopolitics aside, she made history yesterday. All right, she won 3 Olympic medals, and she set this goal for that. And she's someone, if you study her kind of short biography, she's only, I think, 18 years old, but she graduated from a private school in San Francisco within 3 years, and she set this intention and goal early on. She also got admitted to Stanford early, and then I think she dedicated this whole year to training and competing in the Olympics. Yesterday, she finished the half pipe, and I bring her story up because I thought it's very interesting. This is a young woman who knows herself. She's set clear goals and intentions. And obviously, she also had a Chinese mother and a Chinese grandmother who influenced and infused life wisdom into her. Okay, so it took a village, but this is a girl who set her intentions early on. She set her goals early on. She wanted to inspire this sport of skiing into China, and I think she's definitely reached her goal, right, with 3 Olympic medals. And that, to me, I'm going to segue that into this piece about knowing yourself and self-awareness, getting clear about your goals, getting clear about your intentions. All right, I wrote all these thoughts here. I mean, selective colleges, they're looking for students who are curious, inquisitive, engaging in their learning, even during this pandemic, all right? Things are changing so rapidly, but the qualities that U.S. admission officers are looking for, it hasn't changed that much. And I think it starts with this real opportunity to know who you are and getting very clear about your goals and visions, okay? And ask yourself some basic questions like, why do you want to go to that college? Why that specific college? All right, and then you've got to cast a vision and then start being intentional with your university list, with your habits, all right? This isn't something that's going to happen dramatically overnight, but this takes a lot of planning and thought and intention. So I really can't emphasize this enough, and I think during COVID and the subsequent years to come, this piece is going to be actually a lot more important. I want to emphasize a little bit about the changes to the extracurricular activity. All right, school has gone online here in Hong Kong. Activities aren't progressing normally. Clubs are not necessarily meeting regularly. So what can you do? All right, I think the idea is to figure out the activity that drew you to that in the first place and do it well, do it thoughtfully, broadly, creatively. All right, and it may not look like it has before, but that shouldn't stop you from following your interests. And again, how are you engaging your community? All right, and right now with this fifth wave here, I think some students think it's got to be this grandiose thing. I have to go out there and start a nonprofit, and it doesn't necessarily need to be big. I just want to emphasize that, but rather a very targeted focus. All right, so for example, if you have family and right now, mom and dad are busy working, but maybe everybody's at home. If you have younger siblings who are having difficulty with online school, maybe you can take charge of that and help them with their online learning. And you can actually indicate this on your college application. All right, this shows a sign of maturity, a sign of taking responsibility. It signals to the college the type of person you are and the type of person you would be on campus, someone who takes responsibility, someone who will have the character to be helpful, etc., etc. All right. Okay, so you have to do the research. I think the self-reflection piece is going to be very important. All right. I know that it's not easy to kind of think about these things. So work with your current college counselor at school. Work with, obviously you can talk with your parents through this, people you trust that you can really think about these things. And this is also forward thinking, like what type of campus you want, what type of learning environment do I thrive in? Is this a good college match for me? And type of student services. I think when students research colleges, they don't think about, the different services that they'll need. Nowadays, like mental health is a big thing, internships, future career support, all of these things. All right, so I know that here in Asia, we might think, mental health, there's a stigma attached to this, but I'm going to bring it up because time and time again, I've been seeing this more and more, not only because we're still in a pandemic, but I just think this world right now, globally, if you turn on the news, it's like you're going to get bombarded with negativity, all right? So I want to acknowledge that things are really hard right now. So you do have to take care of yourself, especially mental health, all right? Do the self-care, do the things that, help you recharge. I want to point this out. Basically, this is the CASTLE wheel, all right? CASTLE stands for Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. And basically they envision in students and children that you become self-aware, caring, responsible, engaged, and lifelong learners, basically working together to achieve your goals and create a more inclusive, just world, all right? And how do they do this? They do this by social emotional learning. And basically it's the process in which children and adults understand and manage their emotions, set and achieve positive goals, right? Feel and show empathy for others, and establish and maintain positive relationships and make responsible decisions. And you're probably wondering, why is she bringing this up in a college admissions presentation? I'm bringing this up because I feel that this piece is actually really important and valuable for students to develop, especially given the disruptive and sometimes very turbulent world we live in, because these are the skills that I think the 21st century learners and citizens of the world are going to need more and more. And you're going to see this popping up in different industries, even in companies, right? You're going to see this. So I'm bringing this up because the more I think you have these skills intact and emotional intelligence intact, it's going to help you in your college application process. I mean, think about it. In a college interview, if you know how to communicate and articulate who you are in a very mature way, I think almost all admission officers will want to, engage with you. I'm going to bring this slide up of mindfulness and resilience, right? I think some of you already know all of this, but this is going to help you during this time of COVID, during this college application process. You've got to really find ways that are going to nurture the relationships within your families, within your friendship groups, all of this. I think gratitude is going to help, especially in the hard times, especially when you get stressed with this application process. So this is why I wanted to bring this piece up, because I know that we don't talk about this, and sometimes it's the thing that we most want to talk about. I know that when I help and coach students, I bring these things up because it's, like I said earlier, it is a mental marathon. All right, and I want to kind of close with this Ralph Waldo Emerson quote. I think you sow a thought and you reap an action, you sow an act and you reap a habit, you sow a habit and you reap a character, and you sow a character and you reap a destiny. And you're going to see that in this process, it's little habits built up over time. So this isn't something that you do in your senior year or in year 13 and year 12 and say, oh wow, okay, I'm going to apply to college. It's going to be a very thoughtful, intentional process that hopefully you'll partner with your parents with. If you don't have parents who are involved in this, then with your college counselor at school. So I just want to emphasize and kind of leave you with just hope and optimism in this, all right? And also for everyone here in Hong Kong, we're going to overcome what's going on in Hong Kong. I think you have to stay the course, everyone. Keep your dreams and goals and vision very clear and very healthy and alive, okay? I emphasize this because this is what's going to help you persevere, especially through these disruptive times. Because we're surrounded by negativity, and you know what? Omicron is going to get us. It's like every day you're bombarded by the news. But you have to kind of go to another place of stillness, of presence, of keeping the hope and dream and your vision alive. Okay, so I think this is it. I'm going to take some questions. I know that some of the parents had asked a lot about boarding schools. I'm not going to go into that because I think with boarding schools, I think it's going to be a personal decision. So I'm not going to really cover that, but I think I covered everything in terms of like the testing piece. This, I think Baker and Bloom asked me to put this up, so I'm not going to pitch myself here. You guys can decide. But my intention for you, again, is to really make this process thoughtful, strategic, so that you can live your best life and achieve your goals. And as you all know, college is just the beginning. So I hope that this was helpful. I hope that everyone, again, stays safe. And thank you so much for joining us on a Saturday. And I'll take some questions.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. It was a very informative, data-driven presentation. So thank you very much. I want to conduct the Q&A session because we do have a lot of questions formally submitted by the parents, some here. And I also want to invite Ms. Renee Bowie, who is also the founder of Baker and Bloom, who just joined us as well, to also chip in the Q&A session if she has anything to add. Maybe the first question would be can be addressed to Renee if you're ready, which Jennifer said she might not go into, because we do have 3 questions formally submitted by a lot of parents saying that when does going to U.S. boarding school make a difference in U.S. college admissions, and when should they go, and what are the key factors of what age? So Renee, if you can chip in on this question, it would be very helpful. Renee?
Hi. Thank you, Jessica. Thanks for the question. Thank you so much, Jennifer. That was extremely inspiring. And I really love what you said at the end. I've been speaking to a lot of parents about various things. And I think that keeping our hopes and dreams alive amid these times is so essential. And we need to encourage our young people to stay positive. So just to get to that question very quickly, I think most people know that high school is when most people go to boarding school. So that's grade 9 to 12. And in terms of application, that would be the year before, so the fall of grade 8. But there is a trend towards people attending junior boarding school, which would be the 3 years before high school. So most often it's middle school, grade 6, 7, and 8, in which case you would apply fall of grade 5, which sounds terribly early to me, to be honest. But people do that. And a little less common in Hong Kong, I think. More common to go to junior boarding school if they go at all in grade 7 after primary 6, when they finish primary school. And so is the question just about timing? Or is it about kind of like when it's strategic to go?
Not just timing, is whether going to U.S. boarding school will help their chances in getting to U.S. college.
Oh, okay. Right. So obviously boarding schools are called prep schools for a reason. They're sort of designed in many ways to support the application itself, both academically and in terms of college counseling. We do work with a lot of boarding school students. I think that there are advantages in the sense that sometimes there are interests like especially in sports and in arts, which can be cultivated in a way that's a bit different from Hong Kong. I wouldn't say it's necessarily better. It depends on the sports and the arts and music that you're talking about. I've known people who've gone to top boarding schools but came back because they felt that actually, in terms of music, it was more competitive there when you're surrounded by people who are like taking classes at Juilliard, whereas in Hong Kong, they're actually able to be kind of top of the town. And so you do have to think a little bit about what it is that you're good at and which environment would cultivate that best. Now, it isn't always about being best, right? So you can just go there because you feel that the boarding school culture of kind of being on campus all the time and the line between school and your regular life is much more blurred in boarding school, of course. And for some people, that's wonderful. That really allows them, when they want to, they can go to practice, and it's just there. Whether it's like a ceramic studio or like an art music room is right there, so they can develop their interest in a way without any sort of parents or kind of pressure immediately hanging over them. But there is the thing about sort of the level of competition. So I think it's a bit about that. And in our counseling, we also talk a lot about fit, right? So sometimes it isn't about necessarily getting into the so-called top schools, but the schools that you feel would nurture you and allow you to thrive. And so I think it does depend a bit on whether you're happy at the school you are in Hong Kong, whether that is the best environment, and whether the peers are stimulating enough and inspiring enough for your child. And if so, I think that there are many advantages to staying in your local context where you can also provide interesting opportunities and you are serving your own immediate community if you stay. And if you go, the college counseling team is usually more kind of I have to say more experience, and the ratio between the counselor and the students is lower. And often the teacher-student ratio is also lower. But at the same time, everybody at the boarding school is probably aiming for very similar colleges. So that's kind of a little bit of the trade-off that you have to think about. But having said that, yeah, so I think that as Jennifer said, it is a very personal family decision, but we also welcome individual conversations with families.
Yep. Well, thank you very much. Thank you so much for a lot of the questions. I will run through them. So Rosa posed the first question. So Jennifer, is the acceptance rate for international domestic students, I'm guessing same? Would it be higher for US passport holders?
Yeah, that's the question we always get. And it really depends. Okay, it depends on what kind of applicant they are. Listen, if you're a stellar student like Eileen Gu, I'm using her as an example. She's like a unicorn. Okay, she's an athlete, Olympic athlete, but she also did different things like piano, and she was a cross-country runner. Like, she was an athlete, but she was also a scholar. She got, I think, a 1580 on her SATs. It really depends, okay? I can't just give a flat yes or no, because it depends on what type of applicant that is. And so it also depends on school group, what school they attend. There are things in admission offices, like they do look at school groups. So you're technically, yes, you're competing internationally, but you're competing within the context of your school. So because like that, here, I'll pull up the list, right? The grades, the strength of curriculum, and all of that. There is no one straightforward answer. And this is why I think when Asian parents, especially here in Asia, ask me, what's the formula to get in? And then they give me the stats. And I'm like, I can't tell you that on the spot without knowing your student. It's because the US college admissions process for a lot of the selective institutions is a holistic process. Yes, you might have an advantage because you're full pay and US citizen, as opposed to, someone who needs financial aid and who's not. But again, it depends on the context. So my whole thing is make yourself the most interesting kind of, strategic, competitive applicant with all those factors involved. But yeah, international students, they are kind of put in a different category in that, like, yeah, there are certain schools do have quotas. They're not going to explicitly mention that because it's illegal, but yeah, it really depends. So I'm sorry, I can't give a straightforward answer on that, but it depends on the context.
Okay, so the next question from Terrence, also very relevant trend, is how do the college admission scandal affect the dynamics between the admission offices and the consulting firms? Does it affect the ways of the admission?
All right, are you talking about the scandal with Rick Singer? Is that the scandal that you're referring to? I think that, listen, I've worked as a high school counselor, a college counselor, and, one day I might even return to that back at private schools in LA. I don't know, but this is the thing. I know that when you have a caseload, when I worked in high schools and you have a caseload, some college counseling offices, a lot of them, they're very good. At the international schools, I want to say, work with your high school college counselor. I'm not working against it. I would like to work collaboratively with them because I was one of them. And I think it's really important because they write the counselor letter. And in this context of the pandemic, they're going to look more at these letters, even with more emphasis. Like I said, the personal statement is important, but the counselor letter is going to be important. If you do decide to use an outside counselor, use someone who has experience and credentials and who are reputable. As you can see, my approach is very holistic. I'm not going to be the military style like some of these companies here in Hong Kong and Asia who says, we're going to get you in. I'll tell you right now, you can pay someone $1 million. They're not going to get you in. They'll get you in if you're a development case. Sorry, I'm going to be just very frank here. If you're going to donate 7 figures, okay, then if you're an Olympian, there's different special talent cases and development cases, but it's you can hire an outside counselor, but you got to use someone who's reputable and who's going to work very well and holistically with your student. If there's a personality clash, then it's probably not a good fit, right? And also, no one can predict, okay? And so they should not be saying that they're going to guarantee you admissions. And also check their credentials and see if they have professional affiliations with the governing body like NACAC and International ECAC and Council of International Schools. If they're not a member, or if they're not, and they just happen to be a Harvard grad or a Stanford grad who went through the process and decided to go into this, I would say check their credentials, okay? I hope that answers the question. It's a little bit roundabout, but.
Thank you. So the next question is from Kristen. Very relevant to your presentation, although some universities are going test optional, will they assume the student is avoiding testing?
No. Like, Harvard said we're going to look at other criteria. So if you don't submit a test score, they're going to look at the other. They're going to place more emphasis on the essay or other factors like the recommendation letters, their extracurricular activities. So it's not going to penalize you per se, but like I said, if you are a strong test taker and that was in your plan anyhow, and you want to demonstrate that this is a metric that you want them to consider because it's test optional, then in that situation, submit it. But if you're not a strong test taker and you submit a low score, remember, these are human beings looking at your application file, okay? They're not like machines behind processing your applications. A lot of these schools with highly selective admissions, you get like 2 reads at minimum, okay? 2 if not 3. So you want to make sure that if you don't have a good test score, and they're not going to necessarily penalize you, they're going to place more emphasis on other factors. If you're a good test taker, then submit your test scores and plan for it and have a testing strategy starting from sophomore, junior year. So that's what I would say to that.
Thank you, Jennifer. The next 2 questions are a bit similar in nature, so I will combine them. So Michael, Mr. and Mrs. You all asked similar questions in terms of when is it too late? When should they start consultant sessions? When should they start intentional planning, as you mentioned in your presentation? So when to start or when too late?
Yeah, I've been in this industry close to 2 decades, and I've seen it creep up earlier and earlier. And then I think Asia takes it to a whole nother level. I would say a good rule of thumb, I think it starts with curriculum planning because, and it really depends on your family, but I'm not going to push it to start in middle school. I don't think, but some people do. And Baker and Bloom might have a different philosophy than I do, but I doubt it because I think our values are pretty aligned. Usually, I think 9th grade is a good time, but sometimes students come in at different junctures, right? Like they didn't think about it, so they come in the junior year and it's still not too late. Senior year, that's when you do crash courses because really your GPA, your transcript your grades are very important. So managing that, you start, and that's based upon the curriculum and the coursework you take in high school. So you can't plan for that in the junior year, right? It's done. So depending on what your preference is, I think 9th grade is fine. Sophomore year is fine. Junior year, you definitely should be having, that's when you start. And in most international schools, they start, either sophomore or junior year. So typically with the college counselors. So it depends, again, personal preference, but if you start later, then you can't necessarily plan this strategic like extracurriculars and the coursework, the high school coursework. It's too late by that time, right? Your GPA is kind of done, it's set. So I think that would be my best answer.
Yeah. Another question would be from Fei Cheng, is in the NACAC chart, where do legacy and relatives attending the school fall in the ranking? A common question from Baker and Bloom parents.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I didn't include this in the presentation because right now, the movement that's going on in the U.S., if you're not necessarily a U.S. citizen and if you're not living in the States, it's called DEJI, diversity, equity, justice, and inclusion. Like, there's a lot because of the incident of George Floyd. There's a lot of this going on, right? And so that is taking precedence over some of these other factors. Legacy, it will really depend on the institution. Like some institutions like MIT, they don't care like anymore. And so it really depends on the institution. I think some Ivies are still, they keep that relevant. So they're not going to necessarily put that in the NACAC study, because it's one of those, it's one of those things. It can get controversial, but I think legacy, it depends on the institution. So what you don't know is there are development offices or they call it advancement offices at a lot of these highly selective institutions. And when I say donors, and I was being kind of funny before about you need to donate 7 figures, I'm not lying. There are development and advancement officers who cultivate the relationships with families. And I know here in Hong Kong, I'm sure they have some ties too, but that's, I think, kind of a little bit tied in with legacy too. So that may be a factor in some instances, and in other instances, a lot of these U.S. higher education institutions want an equal playing field, and so that becomes controversial. So they get rid of legacy as a factor. So you really have to check.
Thank you very much. From Ringo again, thanks a lot, Jennifer. It's a great sharing. As a member used to sit around the table, if the applicants have similar GPA and profile, will the standard test results still play an important part in the admission consideration process, despite the colleges saying that they're going test optional? Will you still recommend international students to take the SAT or ACT in the coming years? Again, very useful advice from you.
Yeah, I think I said this earlier. Yeah, I mean, it's a human process, right? If a student has an outstanding test score, that can help. Reason being because also it's tied into things like US News and World Reports, right? And so that it can kind of boost their acceptance rate and all that. I'm not going to get into kind of the nitty gritty of things because it's complex, right? And then a lot of the answers, I have to say, it depends on the context. But if all things being equal, yeah, if a student has a good SAT score, a strong SAT score, then it helps. Just think about it logically, rationally, right? If the eyes, when I read through UCLA applicants, and like, you can tell, and you read enough applications, you can tell, who's a strong applicant, who's not. You can tell, I can even tell, I don't know if this kid wrote this essay, I think they got a lot of help, right? Because the voice that's coming through sounds like a 30 or 40-year-old voice as opposed to that teenage voice. So all things being equal, yes, it helps. And again, not all students are good test takers, but every student is different, their strengths are different. So if your student, early on, and you know these things because they take exams, right? They take different assessments. The PSAT is a great way to also show some indication, but just keep in mind also that the SAT is going digital, right? So now it's going to be online. The College Board had to figure out another way because even though they're a nonprofit, I think they're guised as a for-profit. And this is a political statement, but long story short, I think if your student, has the ability to, do well in the standardized testing and they can perform and do well, it's helpful to submit a strong test score with their application.
Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. I do know you need to leave. Would you be able to take one more question, or should I direct that to Renee?
I'll take one more question.
Yeah, why don't we have one last question, because thank you very much to the audience. We have overwhelming number of questions, and I hope that generated a lot of food for thought. Before we go to the last question, I do want to thank Jennifer again. It was a very informative talk, and I think it really gave the parents a good idea of the new landscape arising from COVID and also recent geopolitical consequences. For all the parents that still have questions that we have not answered, or parents who are interested in meeting Jennifer, if you have students who are grade 8 and above, because anyone below grade 8, I think is a bit too early to maybe meet Jennifer at the moment. But if you are interested in US boarding school, you can always meet with someone else on our team. But if you have students grade 8 and above and you still have questions or would like to learn more, then you can arrange a 30-minute complimentary intro meeting with Ms. Jennifer Lee. And you can email info@bnb.edu.hk to arrange for that. So thank you very much for everyone. Jennifer, I will direct one of the last questions to you. It seems that I'll summarize some of the questions because it's from a few different parents, and I think you've covered it a little bit already. A lot of parents are asking how are colleges weighing in on students that go to international schools versus local schools, or if they take IB curriculum versus another curriculum, or if they are from US, like many different backgrounds. So what are the aspects that they will look at first? So I'm combining a few questions here.
Okay, I think the question is like, would a student have an advantage over one curriculum over another, whether it's the IB or the AP?
Yeah, and also if it's local or if it's
local or not.
international. Yeah, like
No, because honestly, colleges are a business, and that's what you guys have to understand, all right? In every business, they want the best, okay? So if you think of it in those terms, it doesn't matter if a student's coming out of a local school or an international school per se, but there's, you know, it's a type of experience that you sign your student up for, right? So, you know, people are asking, like, I think a couple of years ago, it's like, how many students did Stanford take? I think they took like, don't quote me on this, but they took some really crazy number of like maybe like 5 students from the region. And it could be any school at that, you know, it could be a local school, it could be an international school. I think what they're looking at is within the local context. Okay, when I say local context, meaning within your school context, if it's a student that is doing above and beyond and is a phenomenal candidate, they're going to want to admit that student. So you won't necessarily have a disadvantage if you go to a local school per se, but I think sometimes at some of these local schools, sometimes the college counseling offices aren't as, you know, have the numbers, right, so that you can really get well serviced. So I think it depends, but the bottom line is the student needs to really set their goals, set their intentions, do well in their curriculum. It doesn't matter AP or IB or A levels or whatnot, because they're looking at it within the school context. When I worked at Shanghai American, we offered 3 curriculums, the AP, IB, and mixed curriculum. And I personally did like a longitudinal study to see, I did it on both ways, like academically, who was getting in more. And the AP and IB students were equally getting into selective schools, including the mixed curriculum. But what I did realize, and this is why I emphasize the social emotional aspect and the mindfulness and resilience, is that the IB students were breaking down a bit more, because the IB is actually a very, very rigorous curriculum. But I will say this on the flip side, if the students do the IB, they're super well prepared for university. And I found like a lot of my students who went to college were saying, Miss Lee, this is easy. Like high school was harder in some respects. So that's the flip side of it. And I think that's the best answer I can give. But honestly, I think you have to be thoughtful about this, right? If your student is not good at something, don't force them. And I think parents have a lot of the projection comes onto them in this process, and I see a lot of the dynamic between the students and parents relationships suffer, and it doesn't need to if you really kind of pay attention to the strengths. And this is where I'm saying the self-knowledge piece, it really helps. And how you can do that, there's a lot of different personality assessments out there. When I work with students and families, I assess the student's personality, and then it changed, you know, the personality doesn't change too much, but like different strengths can appear later on in different interests, right? There's also the argument, is a student better off being well-rounded or pointy? Meaning, are they better off doing a couple of activities and doing that extraordinarily well versus a student who's like engaging in everything? Again, it really depends on the student. So do you know your child, know their strengths? And then are you able to encourage and cultivate that really well? And I think it's hard right now with the pandemic and everything, but I think the parents need to be, it needs to be a collaborative effort, because the student, they can do it on their own. I mean, like when I was applying to college, I did it, but the system has changed dramatically. And every year, like I said, it's changing. And every year, because the admission officers themselves, some of the higher education institutions, they are doing things that, you know, they have committees thinking about what would work better in place of this. But I will say there are institutions trying to hold deans of admissions at colleges accountable. I know that my grad school at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, there is a report, title is like, I can't remember it off the top of my head, but basically they're doing research that is holding these admission officers responsible, saying, look at other factors such as character and social emotional skills. And that's why I was emphasizing that, because I think this landscape, again, within 5 years is going to change so much. The pandemic has accelerated the trends already, and it's going to continue to evolve and change. And, you know, look at these institutions like the UC's getting rid of testing altogether. So what are they going to replace that with? They have to replace it with another metric. And I think it's going towards these soft skills, like the emotional intelligence skills. So, and they're going to assess that like through interviews as well. So all these things. And I hope, yeah, I hope that gives a little bit of context and flavor. I know everyone's looking for the magic formula, but my point is there is no magic formula. You have to stay consistent. You have to stay thoughtful and like start planning early so that, you know, all these things, you can make sure that they have the best opportunity.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Jennifer. I just wanted to very quickly respond to your first sentence in your answer, that college admission for the universities themselves, they actually are a business as well. So something that we have not mentioned in this presentation is their yield rate. They do expansions, they get loans, and they also look at their own financials. Everything is dependent on their own yield rate. So that's why I want to go back to Jennifer's first recommendation: show interest in whatever way you can to these colleges and universities. Because the more interest you show to these universities, the more they think that if they give you an offer, you will go, and that will improve their own yield rate and will improve their own interest rates as well. Sorry to end on a more business note, but this is the university's point of view as well. So that's why what Jennifer said is they will keep track of how you express interest. So again, thank you so much, Jennifer, for an insightful talk. I will give the last word to Ms. Renee to wrap things up.
Oh, sure. I just wanted to thank Jennifer. I think that was extremely useful to get the big picture view. And I appreciate her reminder that this is a holistic process. And from Baker and Bloom's point of view, you know, those of you, there are many parents here who've joined our webinars from the very beginning, you know that that's our mission. And that's been our approach and style. That's why we've stayed kind of boutique and small, because we care about every student that we work with. Many of the kids who we help, me personally as well, in admissions, I've known for 6 years. And so it's not really just about missions, but who they are, who they're becoming, and who they'll be. We have a team of passionate, experienced coaches who can help kids reflect, discover who they are, pursue and develop their interests. So everything that Jennifer just said about getting to know herself and this being a collaborative process resonates very much with us. And we're here to help you if you are ready and if you'd like that. Okay, I don't want to keep everyone from their weekends, but thank you so much for joining us, and stay positive. We're here to support you, and we hope that everybody stays healthy and positive. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Jennifer.